Bonjour! Aujourd'hui, on va parler des adjectifs. So before we studied adjectives, we learned that we put the adjective after our noun. So it's a little bit different than English. For example, j'ai un livre intéressant. So I have a book that's interesting is literally what we're saying, but an interesting book is how we would translate that into English. Or something like, je porte une robe bleue. Right? So I'm wearing a blue dress. Okay, but in French we're saying a dress blue. And we had also learned that we have un livre, so it's masculine singular, so intéressant, we don't have to add anything. But when we have something like une robe bleue, we have to add an E to our bleu. And then of course, if something is plural, then we have to make the adjective plural because it has to agree in gender and number with our noun. So that's the base of what we learned before. Now, if we go into chapitre 4, right, into chapter 4, we're seeing that in French there are actually some adjectives that precede the noun. So that's more similar to what we're used to in English. And so they give us quite a list here, and you will want to study these and memorize them. So in the first column here, they just say regular, right? And these are just some of the regular ones you will use. So we have grand, and then of course the feminine, you have to add an E, grande. Then we have jolie, that's an L and an I, and then if you want it feminine, you add the E. Then we have mauvais, and if it's feminine, we're going to add an E, and we get mauvaise. Then we have petit, which can mean small or little, and then if we add our E for feminine, we're going to say petite. And then of course we have vrai, we add our E, and we still have vrai, which means true. So those are just some of the regular ones. We simply add an E if we want feminine. Of course, if we want plural, we're going to have to add an S. Then we have some that are irregular. And what's irregular about them is the spelling. So we have the word ancien, okay? And then if we want to make it feminine, we're going to have ancienne. So we don't just add an E, we add an N-E. Then we have beau and belle, okay? Quite different in their spelling. So beau is masculine, belle is feminine. So beau, because we have the U at the end, if we make it plural, we're going to add an X. And belle, we're still just going to add an S. Then we have bon and bonne, right? Adding an N-E for the feminine. We have cher and chère. There we see an accent and an E appear in the feminine. Then we have dernier, dernière. So again, we see an accent appear with an E in the feminine. Then we have faux, fausse, right? So masculine, feminine. Gentil, gentil. We're going to see an L-E added there. Okay, gros, grosse. So we had S-E, long, longue, U-E. And then a few more that are different. We have nouveau, nouvelle. Right, adding nouveau has an E-A-U and nouvelle, E-L-L-E. Then we have premier, première. Again, we have an accent with an E. Then we have vieux and vieille. So V-I-E-U-X and then V-I-E-I. Oh, it's hard to tell on mine. I'm not sure how hard it is to tell in yours, but V-I-E-I-L-L-E is how you're spelling that, vieille. So those are irregular ones, and you'll really want to study those because you can see you can't just add an E. Sometimes we add N-E, sometimes we add an L-E, an S-E, a U-E. Sometimes it looks completely different like beau and belle. And then of course some of them have accents that appear, so you want to study each one of those. And then our final group are ones that are identical whether they're masculine or feminine. You don't have to worry at all about whether they're masculine or whether they're feminine. And those four words are autre, chaque, jeune, and pauvre. Right? So these are commonly used before our nouns. And that is a little bit different than what we had been studying before when we first studied adjectives, where they actually went after our nouns. So they're showing us a few examples here. So if Maurice habite une petite chambre en cité U. So we have une petite chambre. So we used our petit, right? We added an E because it's une chambre. And we made it feminine. And then we're going to put it before. Une petite chambre, right? A small room. If we look at their next example, les jeunes étudiants aiment bien le cinéma. So we have plural students here. And so we used jeune beforehand. We didn't have to worry about masculine and feminine, but we did have to add an S to make it plural. And then their final example here, they have c'est une bonne idée. So idée is feminine. So instead of just the bon, we're going to use bonne, and we're going to add an N and an E. So you always want to be thinking, is it feminine? Is it plural? What do I need to add? Then let's go on and study deux autres adjectifs en particulier. So we have some particular adjectives that we want to study. And we have beau, nouveau, and vieux because they are very irregular. They actually have two masculine forms in the singular. So we have un beau livre, un nouveau livre, un vieux livre, right? That's just a standard masculine of those words, beau, nouveau, vieux. However, in French, some of our nouns are going to start with a vowel. So if they start with a vowel, or they call a muted H, we're going to see that masculine go from beau to belle, but it's not spelled like the feminine. Okay, we have the B-E-L, okay, not the feminine form. So beau, bel appartement, but it's not the feminine form. We have nouveau, nouvel appartement. Again, it is not the same spelling as the feminine. We just have the E-L there. And then we have un vieux livre, un vieil appartement. Okay, so again, V-I-E-I-L. So those are two forms just for these three adjectives that are irregular. So you'll want to study those because you will surely have to use some things in front of a vowel. And then, of course, I mentioned the feminine. The feminine are just your standard feminine that you saw above. Une belle voiture, une nouvelle voiture, une vieille voiture. Those are all the same feminine adjectives that we had previously seen. Okay, so we've seen masculine, these three special masculine adjectives that we have a special thing to memorize those. And then we're going to look at in the plural. Okay, in the plural we have de beaux appartements, de nouveaux appartements, de vieux appartements. So we see we have an X added. Now, of course, the vieux already has an X, so we're not going to add a second X. There's no two X's on the end of the word. Okay, but beau and nouveau are going to get an X, and that's going to be your plural. Notice that appartement is also plural. We have an S. And then a note, I think just below this, you'll see we have de beaux appartements. We have the de instead of des, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Okay. And then for feminine here, we have our feminine forms, right? We have voiture, which is feminine, but this time we're going to have more than one car. Voiture with an S. And then look at our feminine adjectives. We have belle with an S. Nouvelle with an S. Vieille with an S. Okay? And then again, we have the de as opposed to the de. All right? And we'll talk about that here. Now, this is a lot of information, so you really want to go over it, read it in your book several times. If you have questions, make sure you're asking the questions because this is kind of a lot of information. So we have our adjectives. In general, adjectives go after a noun in French, but these are the exceptions that go before. Now, when adjectives are in front of a plural noun, right? There's more than one, so that's what we were just seeing in some of our examples. The de in general becomes de. So if I say j'ai des livres français, j'ai des livres de français, right? I have some French books. But if I want to say I have some new French books, I can say j'ai de nouveaux livres de français. Okay. Il y a des films à la télé. Il y a de vieux films à la télé. So my de is going to become de, and that's only because I have that adjective there in front of my noun. Just une petite note. Okay, so let's continue on because there is still more information that we need to know. So adjectives, there are some adjectives. Maybe I should back up. So we've learned in general adjectives go after our noun. Then we just saw a list in your book of nouns that go before. And now we're going to look at a third group. These are adjectives that can go before and after, right? So, however, depending on whether they go before or whether they go after, it changes their meaning a little bit. So what are these words that can go before and after? The first one is ancien or ancienne, right? We've seen some of these on our list. Then cher and chère, right? They're giving you masculine and feminine there. Grand, and then of course the feminine is grande with an E. And then pauvre, right? It doesn't matter, masculine or feminine, you spell it exactly the same. And then we have seul, right? Which masculine, feminine, you're going to add that E. So what does it mean that they can go before and after? Simply what that means is one is more of a literal sense and one is more of a figurative sense. So if we look at some of their examples, hopefully it'll clear this up a little bit. It says, il a des chaises anciennes. Okay, so he has antique chairs. Okay, so he has antique chairs. So if I want to use the word ancien in the sense of antique, it's going to go after. Il a des chaises anciennes. However, I can use that ancien and I can put it in front of my noun. Monsieur Cellier est l'ancien propriétaire. Right? He is the former landlord. So my ancien changed from meaning antique to meaning former. And all I did was change the position of the adjective to get the other meaning. Let's look at another example. C'est un smartphone très cher. Right? So we have un smartphone. There's my noun. And then we're going to put très cher after it. And that means it's very expensive. So if I'm putting cher after, my word cher is going to mean expensive. But if I say ma chère amie, right, my dear friend, I put the cher in front of my noun, ami in front of friend, and it's changed from expensive to dear. Let's look at another one. C'est un homme très grand, right? So I have un homme, right, a man, and he's très grand. So after the noun, I'm saying grand. So I'm saying he's tall. But I can use that and I can say, c'est un très grand homme. He's a great man. So I can use the word grand and I can mean tall, but it has to come after. And if it comes before, then it's going to mean great. Okay, on continue deux autres. There are two more that we want to look at here. We have les étudiants pauvres reçoivent une bourse de l'État. So we have les étudiants, so we're talking about students, and then we're going to put pauvres after it, right? So they're poor students, meaning they're not rich. They don't have a lot of money. So les étudiants pauvres, okay? And then if we look at the other example, I can say, oh, pauvres étudiants, il y a un examen demain. Right? So poor students, but poor in the sense of, oh, unfortunate students, right? Not poor in the money sense. So if I use it after the noun, the word pauvre, I'm talking about poor as in not rich. And if I use it before, I'm talking about poor as in unfortunate. Et finalement, elle habite seule dans un appartement à Montréal. So elle habite seule, right? So she lives alone. We're going to contrast that with c'est la seule femme haïtienne qui habite près de chez moi, right? C'est la seule femme. So I can say she lives seule, alone, or la seule femme, so I can put it in front of femme and now it means only. So it changed from alone to only. So you will want to go and you will want to study ancien, cher, grand, pauvre, seul. Study those 5 words. Study what they mean if I put it before. What do they mean if I put it after? And then here we do have a video embedded into our ebook, and you'll want to look at this. This is going over some more adjective information, how to form them and how to do masculine, feminine, all of that. And that will be very helpful. So I do want you to be looking at those videos that you're finding in your ebook because that should be a help to you. Okay, one last thing with adjectives. If we have more than one, right? Because if we want to be very descriptive, we might have more than one adjective. So if we have more than one adjective with a noun, each adjective precedes or follows that noun as if we're just using it by itself. So if I look at the first example, I have the words petit and blanc, right? So I know petit is on my list that goes before, but blanc is not. So it's just going to go after. So c'est une petite femme blonde. And then with petite, I added an E because we're talking about une femme, right? Feminine. And blonde, I added an E as well because my noun is feminine. So one went before, one went after. Let's look at the next one. J'ai de bons livres français. So we have livre is our noun. And then we have bon, right? And it's un livre, so it's masculine. I don't have to make it feminine, but it is plural, so I'm going to add an S on my bon. And then we have français, which of course goes after. Français already ends in an S, so we don't need to add an extra S. And last example. C'est un vieil meuble agréable. Okay, so we have un meuble, which is my noun. And then we have vieil, which is a form of vieux, which goes before, and agréable, which is one that just goes after. So we have vieil. Now wait a minute here. We have un immeuble. It's masculine. Why is it not vieux? Can you figure out why it's not vieux? It's not vieux because immeuble starts with an I. It starts with a vowel. So this is one of our words that has a special spelling if it comes in the masculine in front of a vowel. So un vieil immeuble agréable. And then agréable, we don't need to worry about adding or changing that at all because we have a masculine singular and so it already agrees. So these are just a few examples. I will be doing another video where we will be looking at other examples, doing an exercise together in order to go through these adjectives because these can be a little bit difficult. So you really want to spend some time studying these, okay? Keep in mind all the rules. Rule number 1, adjectives in general go after the noun they describe, right? Except for our list. And we looked, if you're looking in your ebook here, they have this whole chart that gives you the list of regular, irregular, and identical masculine, feminine adjectives that actually go before a noun and what they mean. So you want to study all those and study what they look like in the masculine, what they look like in the feminine. Okay, so these are the ones that go before. They're an exception to the rule. And then we have beau, nouveau, and vieux, who have a little extra there with when we have a masculine in front of a vowel, right? And then we want to look at the plural of that. And then if we have adjectives with plural nouns before, our de becomes de. That's just a little side note there. And then, of course, we have adjectives that can go both before and after. So you want to study these 5. So there's not a lot, but it is important to know them and what they mean depending on if they're in front or behind your noun.